Hello again. So for this video, we're going to look at the first step, which really focuses on the problem, defining the problem, identifying who the stakeholders are around the issue, as well as some of the financial, organizational, and political aspects of that issue. So again, we're on step one of Bardak's eightfold path. We're defining the problem, really digging into what the issue is. So for our problem definition, we're interested in the causes and consequences of the problem. We're going to dig more into the causal logic and causal relationships in the next video. In terms of stakeholders and relevant organizations, we're really interested in the government agencies, the non-profits, the companies, the interested citizens, the populations served. We're also interested in the money. Finances, budgets are a really important part of any issue. Where is the money to pay for the solution? Who is going to pay? How are people impacted economically by either the problem or the solution? And given that money is at the heart of politics and at the heart of political decision making, what is public opinion on the issue? And what stances do prominent political figures take? So as you can see, these elements are really interconnected with one another. So we've talked a lot about problems. Here's some examples. Water. Until a couple of years ago, we experienced numerous droughts in California, and that was really putting pressure on various systems. Clearly, there are really political dimensions to water within the state of California. LA would not have been built without bringing in water from the Central Valley, and so these issues continue to this day. Climate change is already having a major impact on societies around the world. How might we address this issue? Another area of my research, disasters, whether that's natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, human-made, terrorism, international conflicts, system failures. These are threatening even the wealthiest countries and areas in the world. We see that with the COVID pandemic. Homelessness is increasing in Los Angeles, a major ongoing problem that's very hard to solve. And student projects are across the board in terms of the various problems that we see, both in society and then also within government. And that's an important distinction to make. Sometimes you might be looking at a problem that's in society that might be seen as a first order problem. And then maybe there's a problem with the solution to the problem. So the government agency that should be addressing that problem might have issues of its own. They can all contribute to ultimately trying to improve society. All of these analyses could help contribute to improving society and the government that is serving that society. So issue diagnosis. What do we mean by this? Well, really it's to define or frame the problem. What conditions are harmful? Are there opportunities for change? What stakeholders have a standing regarding these harms or improvements? So who is being impacted by the particular problem and who stands to gain from a particular solution? Who are the winners and losers in this area? And what are the linkages, causal relationships, if you will, between the means, the policy, and the ends, the outcomes? So issue diagnosis raises questions about social science and political philosophy. What causes a particular problem and what is the evidence for that? And more deeply, what is the legitimacy of government or public action? So should social activity that's in the private realm, so should the solution to that problem be in the private world, whether that's by individuals, charities, the marketplace, companies, or should public, government, collective action be the area of solutions? There's no right or wrong answer here. This depends on political philosophy. It depends on the philosophies, the ideas at the heart of that particular country or state or region's approach to solving problems. So here are some key steps for defining and locating the problem. First, you can identify any claims of harm. And you want to make sure that you substantiate the magnitude and the incidence of those harms. How big are these harms? Who's most impacted? Is it the wealthiest or is it the poorest? You also need to consider the causal theories of harm. What is it that's leading to that harmful practice or outcome? And then you really want to search for credible evidence regarding that causality. And when you are conducting those first 4 steps, you want to think about the political and organizational context of the issue. So when should governments intervene? There are some situations when markets, quote unquote, fail, potentially justifying government intervention. So these could be related to externalities, where the transaction, for example, filling your car with gas, imposes costs or benefits on people outside of that transaction. So when you're driving your car, you might be polluting those neighborhoods near you, and that can lead to health impacts for those communities. But you're not paying directly to compensate them. That's not part of that initial transaction. And there's many examples of externalities in society where regulation can actually improve the aggregate social welfare. And you might do that through regulation, you might do it through incentives, taxation, you might have to rethink how property rights work. There's also numerous examples of public goods. So public goods are both non-excludable and non-rival. We could think about air quality or defence. And in those cases, it makes sense for the government to provide public safety or defence or public parks or clean air so that there's benefits to the whole society that could not be easily provided by the marketplace. Another example is a common pool resource, which is really a particular type of public good. Examples here include water aquifers, or maybe fishing resources, or maybe HOA public spaces. And in these cases, we often need to engage in collective action. That's maybe private agreements between a large group of people, like an HOA or a group of farmers. And when that is undertaken, even though there's some costs, it's more beneficial to everybody to be able to manage that kind of process. Now, there are also other reasons why government might intervene in particular issues, whether they're moral based. As a society, we might all agree that particular goals should be achieved, whether that's racial equality, whether that is equality of opportunity. These kind of ethical or moral principles might guide our public policy interventions. However, policy interventions in any of these areas should really be based on accurate understanding of problems and how they can be solved. Now, this can be really difficult. So back in the early days of policy analysis, which is a very 20th century American idea, engineers and other systems analysts attempted to solve very tricky social problems based on the principles they'd used to solve still complex but important infrastructural problems. Rittel and Weber summarize this well. With arrogant confidence, the early systems analysts pronounced themselves ready to take on anyone's perceived problem, diagnostically to discover its hidden character, and then, having exposed its true nature, skillfully excise its root causes. Now, that sounds great in theory, but the challenge is that many policy issues are highly complex and ultimately involve people. And people, as we all know, are imperfect, unpredictable, they're fallible. Can you use the same tools for flood prevention as you would for child abuse and neglect? Clearly not. I'm going to provide a case study now about homelessness in LA. There's been rising homelessness over the past decade. So what are the causes of this problem? Well, there are many. It's very complex. There's some short-term factors, including house price increases. There's also been a squeeze on federal housing subsidies, such as Section 8. And then this recent increase in homelessness is arguably also the result of the Great Recession. Some longer-term factors, which have been going on for a number of decades now, include a lack of sufficient support for emancipating foster youth, a lack of support for those with mental illnesses, especially as a result of the deinstitutionalization approach in the 1980s. There's also a lack of support of veterans, although that has changed, thankfully, in recent years. And then obviously substance abuse and addiction. And the consequences, or what we might see as the harms of homelessness, so these spread across the homeless individuals who might experience additional health impacts, additional mental health impacts. They're going to struggle to exit homelessness. They're actually disproportionately likely to be the victims of crime. There might be impacts on local residents, so local pollution. Now, for local businesses, clearly that might impact demand for their business. It's also very costly for public safety officials, whether police or fire officials. It's actually far more expensive for a homeless individual to be imprisoned than it is for them to be in some supportive housing. There are numerous stakeholders within Los Angeles. A key actor in this area is the LA Homeless Services Authority, which is a county authorized yet independent authority. And they're managing a large budget and have also been at the heart of the stakeholder interactions which have been around recent policy initiatives. So as a result of the combined work of these numerous stakeholders, including public, private, nonprofit, and universities, many more than I mentioned on the slide previously, 2 major tax rises were passed by LA voters. So there's clearly political support for this in general. And in total, they raised about $4.2 billion over a 10-year period. And those funds are being spent in various different areas, including homelessness prevention, subsidizing housing, increasing incomes, case management and services, coordinating the entire system, and also aiming to increase affordable and homeless housing. That final step has been really challenging because many local residents in areas that are proposing to build homeless housing have really fought against some of those developments. Now, there's a very thorough plan, the Homeless Initiative Action Plan, and you can see here the various different approaches that are being used to try and address this issue. Now, this action plan was uniquely the result of a stakeholder engagement process where all the major stakeholders who are working on homelessness within Los Angeles came together and discussed all of the different approaches that they might use to try and address this problem. So I hope this video has given you a sense of some of the steps that you can go through to start your problem identification. In the next video, we'll look at causal relationships, which is a key element of that first step. And then in the third video, we'll dig even deeper into one way of looking at causal relationships, which is also known as a logic model.